Hello, YouTube! Welcome to Silmarillion Sunday Part 13. We are focusing today on Chapter 16 of Maeglin. If you've never seen the show before, this is what we do when we read the Silmarillion, the prequel to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. This is the story of the First Age. If you want to just be dropped in the middle of things without any explanation, feel free to stay here. If you want to start from the very beginning, go to Explaining and Reading the Silmarillion Part 1. There should be a playlist somewhere on the channel. Maybe you're watching it right now and it's to my left or right. I don't know how directions work on cameras. Regardless, we are starting this chapter with today with Chapter 16 of Maeglin. Now, there are very few characters in Tolkien's Legendarium that are dedicated to their own, or that get their own chapters dedicated to them. So, if it seems a little weird that Maeglin is just kind of there, hanging out, not much happens, it's foreshadowing, because Tolkien, again, subtle as a train wreck, dedicates a chapter to Maeglin. And we're going to find out why. The other great part, if you do want to sort of do this in medias res, where, you just get dropped in the middle of everything, on all of the action, is that this chapter actually stands alone. So theoretically, you could watch this, be interested in the writing style or the lore or the world, and just kind of go from here. I will do a small recap, so here we go. In the beginning, there was Eru, the god of Tolkien's universe. He created the Ainur. The Ainur are, think of them like lesser gods. I know some people call them like demigods, angels. There's a bunch of different things. Anyway, the Ainur created the physical world, and a couple of the Ainur went down to the physical world. That's Middle-earth and the Undying Lands. It's also flat. I don't know why I do this every time, but I do. We get names for these Ainur that went down. There are 14 of them. They're called the Valar. As a collective group, they all have names. There is one bad one, though. His name is Melkor. And Melkor wants to enslave everybody and rule over them. And not very many people take lightly to that. So they fight him, and there's a big back and forth. And then the elves come to consciousness, and they go over to the Undying Lands. And then there's this sort of huge battle where Melkor is, defeated, and then he comes back and pretends to be good. And then he starts trying to make up for what he did, but in reality he's just poisoning the minds of some of the elves. One of those elves' names is Feanor, and Feanor is I think the Valar are actually here to enslave us. And Melkor was right, because that's what Melkor was telling Feanor. And eventually Melkor does a whole bunch of bad stuff, kills Feanor's father, steals Feanor's sacred gems called the Silmarils, which contain the literal light of the world. He destroys 2 sacred trees in the Undying Lands. It's a whole thing. So Melkor runs away, and he gets a new name called Morgoth. And then Feanor is hey, we're going to go get him. Let's go get him. And the Valar are please don't. Please don't. You're going to lose. Please don't. Just let him go. It's fine. And Feanor is no. And so the Noldor, who are the group of elves that Feanor... I gotta find a way to do this in 60 seconds. I'm so sorry. So Feanor is okay, I don't need any of your help. I'm gonna go over to Middle-earth. We need ships. So they try and get ships from their friends, the elves called the Teleri. And the Teleri are no. Please don't do this. There's a theme happening here. Do you see the patterns, right? So the Noldor and Feanor kill most of the elves that have the ships. And then they steal the ships and they sail to the Undying Lands. But not all of the ships can fit all of the elves. And so Feanor's sons, he has 7 of them, are hey, let's send the ships back and we can get more of the elves. And Feanor is no, and burns the ships. It's a problem. You see where we're going here. Feanor, not a great dude. So the rest of the elves, the Noldor, who are still banished at this point, right? The Valar are just fine, go away, but don't come back. So the Noldor are all right, cool. Well, we can't get there by ship. Let's cross this icy tundra, which is the equivalent of Antarctica, to go to Middle-earth. And they did. And a bunch of them died, right? And then they come to Middle-earth, and they're saving... There are still some elves in Middle-earth. One of them is named Thingol. Sorry. forgot there for a second. One of the elves is named Thingol, and he was like the ruler of the elves that didn't go to the Undying Lands. And they're like, hey, more elves, cool, awesome. What are you guys doing here? Because we've got this Morgoth guy we got to fight. So do you want to help? And they all fight together, and then Feanor dies, right? Spoiler alert, sorry. But if you're on here anyway, probably shouldn't have said that. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, Feanor dies and realizes, oh shoot, we did need the Valar's help. What are we going to do? And the answer is he's going to do nothing. He dies, right? So then all of these elves are just kind of intermingling and being like, okay, we're going to fight against Morgoth, and that's it. And there's a 200-year time skip. And so the last 2 chapters were basically set up for everything else that happens. So you'll remember Chapter 14 was of Beleriand and its realms. That's the episode where I did all of those maps and where people are and what the world looks like. Chapter 15 is of the Noldor in Beleriand, in which Thingol, one of the kings that lives in a place called Doriath, is like, hey, all you elves that were coming over from the Undying Lands, what's the deal? Why are you over here? And they're like, oh yeah, we came to help you, but also we might have killed a bunch of your friends. And Thingol is like, okay, this isn't gonna go well. So Thingol bans the use of their language, the language of Quenya, in the Elvish tongue. There are 2. One is Sindarin and Quenya. Quenya is what they spoke in the Undying Lands, and Sindarin is what they speak in Middle-earth. It's what Legolas speaks, in case anyone is interested. Also, very special thank you to Manta Radius. Thank you for the follow. Also, y'all on TikTok, if you want to come check out the Twitch stream, please do so. The link is in the bio, and I give people shout-outs. Thank you. Okay, so Flutter for a Day makes an excellent point. Everyone else, Feanor, no. Feanor, yes. Absolutely right. Top notch. So we kind of have this setup, right? There's a lot of setup that we got where we know where everybody is, and now Thingol and Melian, the people who were the power couple basically, who was living in Middle-earth, and they're like, oh, so all of these elves are they get killed a bunch of our friends, and everyone's like, yeah, sorry about that, and no one's really sorry. Also, thank you to Sarah Malloy 97 for the resub, much appreciated. That is 2 months in a row. Sarah, I believe you also gifted a bunch of subs on St. Patrick's Day. I remember that. Thank you so much. So today we're going to start with chapter 16, and it's kind of a shorter one. We may go into the next one, which is of the coming of men into the West. Depends on how fast this goes. We probably won't have a lot of questions because it's a very plot-driven part of the story. So if you're wondering why Maeglin is important, here we go. Also, shout out to New Beta Do Beta, the other TikToker, Lord of the Rings TikToker on TikTok, who did a great video on Maeglin in 60 seconds. All right, here we go. Chapter 16 of Maeglin. Aradel Arfiniel. Oh, wow. We're starting off strong, y'all. I don't know how to pronounce his names. Aradel Arfiniel. Aradel Arfiniel. I'm going to go with that. Maybe it's... Actually, you know what? Hang on. I have an audiobook that I can listen to and get the pronunciation. I need to mute you all because this might be copyright. Please hold. Arathel Artheniel. Beautiful name. No idea how to pronounce it. No idea. All right, here we go. 20 minutes into the show and I haven't started reading. We're off to a great start, y'all. Here we go. Arathel Arfeniel, the White Lady of the Noldor, daughter of Fingolfin. You'll remember Fingolfin is the king of all of the Noldor, all the elves that came over from the Undying Lands with Feanor. He is the king of them. Arathel Arfeniel, the White Lady of the Noldor, daughter of Fingolfin, dwelt in Nevrast with Turgon her brother, and she went with him to the Hidden Kingdom. You'll remember last chapter as well, Turgon, one of the elven rulers, let's call him, created a location, basically a secret hidden city called Gondolin, where a lot of the elves went to basically as a safety precaution. Like, this is not safe. We need to hide ourselves. And they did. So the hidden kingdom of Gondolin. But she wearied of the guarded city of Gondolin, desiring ever the longer the more to ride again in the wide lands and to walk in the forests, as has been her wont in Valinor. And when 200 years had passed since Gondolin was full wrought, she spoke to Turgon, and asked leave to depart. Turgon was loath to grant this, and long denied her. But at the last she yielded, saying, "Go then, if you will, though it is against my wisdom, and I forebode that ill will come of it, both for you and to me. But you shall go only to seek Fingon, our brother, and those that I send with you shall return hither to Gondolin as swiftly as they may." But Arethel said, "I am your sister, and not your servant. And beyond your bounds I will go as seems good to me, and if you begrudge me an escort, then I will go alone." Then Turgon answered, "I grudge you nothing that I have. Yet I desire that none shall dwell beyond my walls who know the way hither. And if I trust you, my sister, others I trust less to keep guard on their tongues." And Turgon appointed 3 lords of his household to ride with Arethel, and he bade them lead her to Fingon in Hithlum. Hithlum is like the most northwestern part of Middle-earth at this point. Ride with Arethel, and he bade them lead her to Fingon in Hithlum, if they might prevail upon her. "And be wary," he said, "for though Morgoth be yet hemmed in the north, there are many perils in Middle-earth, of which the lady knows nothing." Then Arethel departed from Gondolin, and Turgon's heart was heavy at her going. Sorry, I had to ban a person. It was a bot. But when she came to the fords of Berethiak in the river Sirion, she said to her companions, "Turn now south and not north, for I will not ride to Hithlum. My heart desires rather to find the sons of Feanor, my friends of old." And since she could not be dissuaded, they turned south as she commanded, and sought admittance into Doriath. But the march wardens denied them, for Thingol would suffer none of the Noldor to pass the girdle, save his kinsfolk of the house of Finarfin, and least of all those that were friends of the sons of Feanor. Thingol is a bit of a stickler. You'll remember Thingol is a guy or an elf. Hang on, I gotta ban another bot. What's going on here? Am I getting raided by bots? Hope not. You'll remember Thingol controls like the center-ish of Middle-earth. He married a Maiar, who is another one of those Ainur, those like lesser god angel type characters. So they've got this big force field around their area, and so Thingol is like really mad that the Noldor are here, and they're like, no, you're not allowed in my realm, not at all. He was the one that banned the use of Quenya. I think I mentioned that before. And where'd I go? For Thingol would suffer none of the Noldor to pass the girdle, save his kinsfolk of the house of Finarfin, and least of all those who were friends of the sons of Feanor. Therefore the march warden said to Arethel, "To the land of Celegorm, for which you seek, lady, you may by no means pass through the realm of King Thingol. You must ride beyond the girdle of Melian, to the south or to the north. The speediest way is by the path that leads east from the Brethiak through Dimbar and through the long march of his kingdom, until you pass the bridge of Esgalduin and the fords of Aros, and come to the lands that lie behind the hills of Himring. Again, you don't really have to remember all of this. Take a look at a map if you're very interested, but a lot of these places are either one-off or mentioned casually, then they don't play a huge role in it. There dwell, as we believe, Celegorm and Corufin, which are two of the sons of Feanor. And it may be that you will find them, but the road is perilous. Again, Tolkien's subtlety is like a train wreck. And sometimes that train wreck is on fire, and sometimes that fire has a Balrog in it. Let's continue. Then Arathel returned back and sought the dangerous road between the haunted valleys of Ered Gorgoroth and the northern fences of Doriath. And as they drew near to the evil region of Nan Dungortheb, the riders became enmeshed in shadow, and Arathel strayed from her companions and was lost. They sought long for her in vain, fearing that she had become ensnared or had drunk from the poisoned streams of the land. But the fell creatures of Ungoliant that dwelt in the ravines were aroused, and pursued them, and they hardly escaped with their lives. When at last they returned and their tale was told, they had great sorrow in Gondolin, and Torgon sat long alone, enduring grief and anger in silence. So he thinks that she's dead. Torgon thinks his sister is dead. All right. But Arathel, having sought in vain for her companions, rode on, for she was fearless and hardy of heart. And when all of the children of as were all of the children of Finwë, and she held on her way, and crossing Asgalduin and Auros, came to the lands of Himlad between Auros and Kelon, where Celegorm and Corufin dwelt in those days before the breaking of the siege of Angband. At that time they were from home, riding with Caranthir east of Targelion. Again, you don't have to remember any of this. Just know that they're not there. But the people of Celegorm welcomed her, and bade her stay among them with honor until their lord's return. There for a while she was content, and had great joy in wandering free in the woodlands. But as the year lengthened, and Celegorm did not return, she became restless again, and took to riding alone, ever further abroad, seeking the new path and untrodden glades. Thus it chanced in the waning years that Arathel came to the south of Himlad, and passed over Kelon, and before she was aware, she became enmeshed in Nan Elmoth. In that wood, in ages past, Melian walked in the twilight of Middle-earth. You'll remember Melian is the Maya that married Thingol. Thingol is one of the elven lord that stayed in Middle-earth. They're married. They're the power couple, basically. Melian did this thing where she, walked through the forest and said a bunch of spells and enchantments, and it's all very magical and fairy and fey. In the woods in ages past, Melian walked through the twilight of Middle-earth, when the trees were young and enchantment lay upon them still. But now the trees of Nan Elmoth were the tallest and darkest in all Beleriand, and there the sun never came. And there Eol, E-O-L, and there Eol dwelt, who was named the Dark Elf, capital D in dark, capital E in elf. Of old he was the kin of Thingol, but he was restless and ill at ease in Doriath. And when the girdle of Melian was set about the forest of Region, where he dwelt, he fled thence to Nan Elmoth. There he lived in deep shadow, loving the night and the twilight under the stars. He shunned the Noldor, holding them to blame for the return of Morgoth, to trouble the quiet of Beleriand. But for the dwarves he had more liking than any other of the elven folk of old. From him the dwarves learned much of what passed in the lands of the Eldar. So he's kind of like this loner, this Eldar who is a loner. Now the traffic of the dwarves down from the Blue Mountains followed two roads across East Beleriand and the Northern Way, going towards the fords of Aros, past nigh to Nan Elmoth, and there Eol would meet the Naugrim. Naugrim is another word for dwarves. and hold converse with them, and as their friendship grew, he would at times go and dwell as guests in the deep mansions of Nogrod or Belegost. There he learned much of metalwork, and came to great skill therein, and he devised a metal as hard as a steel of the dwarves, but so malleable that he could make it thin and supple, and yet it remained resistant to all blades and darts. He named it Galvorn, for it was black and shining like jet, and he was clad in it whenever he went abroad. But Eol, though stooped in his smithwork, was no dwarf, but a tall elf of the high kin of the Teleri, noble and grim of face. And his eyes could see deep into shadow and dark places, and it came to pass that he saw Arethel Arfaniel, as she strayed among the tall trees near the borders of him, and he desired her, and he set his enchantment about her, so that she could not find the ways out, but drew ever nearer to his dwelling in the depths of the woods. There were his smithy, and his dim halls, and such servants as he had, silent and secret as their master. And when Arethel, weary with wandering, came at last to his doors, he revealed himself, and welcomed her, and he led her into the house, and there she remained, for Eol took her to wife, and it was long ere any of her kin heard from her again. Now, if that seems creepy or like a red flag to anyone, good. You've got smart street senses, or good street smarts, however you want to phrase it. It's creepy. It's creepy. Now, I do want to address something here. The fact that Tolkien uses the phrase dark elf is not a use of skin color in any way. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't think we ever get a description of Eol's skin color. There are some elves that do have a leathery gray kind of skin. Some people read a little bit more into this. I do not. It is a personal choice by me. You are free to read whatever you want into this particular portion. I just think Eol is a very creepy, quote-unquote, dark elf. By no means a skin color, just a title that he has because he dwells in a dark part of a very dark forest. Just want to get that out of the way. Again, if it seems creepy, it's because it is. Tolkien's subtlety is like a train wreck on fire, and that fire has a Balrog in it. And the Balrog brought a couple of friends. Again, I'm just going to keep creating the visual so that we go further. It is not said that Arethel was wholly unwilling, nor that her life in Nan Elmoth was hateful to her for many years. For though at Eol's command she must shun the sunlight, they wandered far together, under the stars, or by the light of the sickle moon. Or she might fare alone as she would, save that Eol forbade her to seek the sons of Feanor, or any other of the Noldor. You see where this is going, right? I hope you see where this is going. And Arethel bore to Eol a son in the shadows of Nan Elmoth, and in her heart she gave him a name in the forbidden tongue of the Noldor, Lomion, that signifies child of the twilight. But his father gave him no name until he was 12 years old. I don't know how common that is among Elvish culture, but maybe. Then he called him Maeglin, Maeglin, for those curious about the spelling. Then he called him Maeglin, which is piercing, which is sharp glance. Not really. For he perceived that the eyes of his son were more piercing than his own, and his thought could read the secrets of hearts beyond the mist of words. This is kind of what happens when I say that Tolkien's magical power with the elves is very ambiguous. Can Maeglin read minds? Maybe. I don't know. Does he come right out and say it? Kind of. Not really-ish. Who knows? As Maeghlin grew to full stature, he resembled in face and form rather his kindred of the Noldor, but in mood and mind he was the son of his father. His words were few, save in matters that touched him near, and then his voice had the power to move those that heard him, and to overthrow those that withstood him. He was tall and black-haired, and his eyes were dark, yet bright and keen as the eyes of the Noldor, and his skin was white. Often he went with Eöl to the cities of the dwarves in the east of Ered Lindon, and there he learned eagerly what they would teach him, and above all the craft of finding the ores and metals of the mountains. So Maeglin's not a bad guy. Elf. Yeah. Yet it is said that Maeghlin loved his mother better, and if Eöl were abroad he would sit long beside her and listen to all that she could tell him of her kin and their deeds in Eldamar, the Undying Lands, and of the might and valor of the princes of the house of Fingolfin. All these things he laid to heart, but most of all that which he heard of Turgon, and that he had no heir. For Elenwe, his wife, perished in the crossing of the Helcarax, and his daughter, Idril Celebrindel, was his only child. So, how do I want to put this best? Eöl's son Maeghlin is hearing these fanciful stories of these great kingdoms beyond the realms that he explores, and there's beautiful fantasy in them, and there's this beautiful elven princess and this elven king that has no sons but a beautiful daughter and, needs a ruler to, continue the patriarchy. You see where this is going, right? In the telling of these tales, there was awakened in Arethel a desire to see her own kin again, and she marveled that she had grown weary of the light of Gondolin, and the fountains of the sun, and the green wards of Tumladen under the windy skies of spring. Moreover, she was often alone in the shadow when both her son and her husband were away. Of these tales also grew the first quarrels of Maeghlin and Eöl. For by no means would his mother reveal to Maeghlin where Turgon dwelt, nor by what means one might come thither. And he bided his time, trusting yet to wheedle the secret from her, or perhaps to read her unguarded mind. And ere that could be done, he desired to look on the Noldor and speak with the sons of Feanor, his kin, that dwelt not far away. But when he declared his purpose to Eöl, his father was wrathful. "You are of the house of Eöl, Maeghlin, my son," he said, "and not of the Golodrim. All this land is the land of the Teleri, and I will not dwell nor have my son deal with the slayers of our kin, the invaders and usurpers of our homes. In this you shall obey me, and I will set you in bonds." And Maeghlin did not answer, but was cold and silent, and went abroad no more with Eöl. And Eöl he mistrusted. Aw, it's his teenager rebellion. I wonder if it's going to go well. I keep dropping all of these foreshadowing hints, if anybody was worried about, being shocked by anything, I'm definitely spoiling it for you. But really, am I? Anyway, let's continue. It came to pass that at a midsummer the dwarves, as was their custom, bade Eöl to the feast in Novgorod, and he rode away. Now Maeghlin and his mother were free for a while to go where they wished, and they rode often to the eaves of the wood, seeking the sunlight, and desire grew hot in Maeglin's heart to leave Non Elmoth forever. Therefore he said to Arethel, "Lady, let us depart while there is time. What hope is there in this wood for you or for me? Here we are held in bondage, and no profit shall I find here, for I have learned all that my father has to teach, or that the Naugrim will reveal to me. Shall we not seek for Gondolin? You shall be my guide, and I will be your guard." Then Arathel was glad, and looked with pride upon her son, and telling the servants of Eol that they went to seek the sons of Feanor, sneaky, they departed, and rode away to the north eaves of Non Elmoth. There they crossed the slender streams of Kelon into the land of Himlad, and rode to the fords of Aros and westward across the fences of Doriath. Now Eol returned out of the east sooner than Maeglin had foreseen, and found his wife and son but 2 days gone, and so great was his anger that he followed after them even by the light of day. As he entered the Himlads, he mastered his wrath and went warily, remembering his danger. For Celegorm and Curufin were mighty lords who loved Eol not at all, and Curufin, moreover, was of perilous mood. But the scouts of Aglod had marked the riding of Maeglin and Arathel from the fords of Aros, and Curufin perceived that strange deeds were afoot, and Curufin, perceiving that strange deeds were afoot, came south from the pass and encamped near the fords. And before Eol had ridden far across the Himlad, he was waylaid by the riders of Curufin and taken to their lord. Then Curufin said to Eol, "What errand have you, dark elf, in my lands? An urgent matter, perhaps, that keeps one so sun-shy abroad by day?" Curufin's kind of a jerk. Also, special thank you to Dicarbonoxide 101. And Eol, knowing his peril, restrained the bitter words that arose in his mind. "I have learned, Lord Curufin," he said. I have learned. I don't know what accent I just did there. I was trying to do a more raspy for Eol. Let me try that again. "I have learned, Lord Curufin," he said, "that my son and my wife, the White Lady of Gondolin, have ridden to visit you while I was from home, and it seemed fitting for me that I should join them in this errand." But Curufin laughed at Eol and said, "They might have found their welcome here less warm than they had hoped, had you accompanied them. But it is no matter, for that was not their errand. It is not 2 days since they passed over the Arosiach, Arossiach. I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry, y'all. It's water. They passed over a river, and thence rode swiftly westward. It seemed that you would deceive me, unless indeed you yourself have been deceived." And Eol answered, "Then, Lord, perhaps you will give me leave to go and discover the truth of this matter?" "You have my leave, but not my love," said Curufin. "The sooner you depart from my lands, the better will it please me." Then Eol mounted his horse, and saying, "It is good, Lord Curufin, to find a kinsman thus kindly at need. I will remember it when I return." Then Curufin looked darkly upon Eol. "Do not flaunt your title of your wife before me," he said. "For those who steal the daughters of the Noldor and wed them without gift or leave do not gain the kinship with their kin. I have given you leave to go. Take it and be gone. By the laws of the Eldar, I may not slay you at this time, and this counsel I add. Return now to your dwelling in the darkness of Non Elmoth, for my heart warns me that if you now pursue those who you love no more, never shall you return thither." Then Eol rode off in haste, and he was filled with hatred of all the Noldor, for he perceived now that Maeglin and Arathel were fleeing to Gondolin, and driven by anger and the shame of his humiliation, he crossed the fords of Aros, and rode hard upon the way that they had gone before. But though they knew not that he followed them, he had the swiftest steed, and he came never in sight of them until he reached the Brethiac, and abandoned their horses. Then by ill fate they were betrayed, for the horses neighed loudly, and Eol's steed heard them and sped towards them. And Eol saw them from afar. the white raiment of Arathel, and marked which way she went, seeking the path into the mountains. So I've gone a very long time without questions, so I will pause there for a quick second. Sorry, y'all, I went 6 pages without realizing it. Special thank you to dicarbon dioxide. That's hilarious. Y'all on TikTok, if you are still here, feel free to check out the Discord. The link is in my bio. Don Marshall 72 over on Twitch. I do give shout-outs to anyone interested. Also to anyone on YouTube. If you're rewatching this and you haven't given a follow, we do stream here every Sunday at noon for Silmarillion Sunday. And we will be streaming on Wednesdays more regularly now at 7 p.m. Eastern. Also, someone just asked what page I'm on. So I am currently reading the Mariner copy that has the mountain range on top of it. I am currently on chapter 16, page 136. Hope that helps. All right. Kaylee, thank you so much for being here. I don't know if you're still here. It said you had to go, but thank you so much for joining. And I think that is it for the questions for right now. I don't see any, but feel free to put them down in the comments section below. Josh says I should read this for Audible. Thank you. So I would love to be a voice actor of some kind, or do audiobooks. It is one of my favorite things to listen to. Like, I don't read nearly as much as I want to, because obviously time is short, but I drive a lot. And I drive and I listen to audiobooks, and that's how I initially got into audiobooks. I initially read the Silmarillion, then listened to the audiobook. All right, so I don't see too many questions, so if it's okay, I am going to keep going. If anyone does have questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. And also, to those listening on YouTube, feel free to leave questions in the comments of YouTube. Those questions kind of I can address in the next portion, or if you feel so inclined to have them answered in real time, check out the chat. I don't know why I glanced that way. That's where the chat is for me. But it's over there for you, right? That way for you, over by where my arm is. Anyway. All right, so let's keep it going. Now Arathel and Maeglin came to the outer gates of Gondolin and the dark guard under the mountains. And there she was received with joy, and passing through the 7 gates she came with Maeglin to Torgon upon Amon Gwareth. Then the king listened with wonder to all that Arathel had to tell, and he looked with liking upon Maeglin, his sister-son. Tolkien uses the word sister-son in place of nephew. I think it's a more older, traditionally, like, not necessarily medieval times, I don't think, but it's an older, more traditional way of saying nephew. You'll find that Tolkien, uses this in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where Theoden refers to Éomer and Éowyn as his sister-son and sister-daughter. Sorry, I totally lost my place. Then the king listened with wonder to all that Arathel had to tell, and he looked with liking upon Maeglin, his sister-son, seeing in him one worthy to be accounted among the princes of the Noldor. So things are going well, right? Here's this young elf kid being brought up on stories of these ancient elvish kingdoms that, are actually his kin, and all of a sudden he finds himself in one. Oh my gosh, and all of a sudden Thingol likes him and is like, oh, this is great. Maybe I'll be an elven prince. I rejoice indeed that Arfaniel has returned to Gondolin, he said. And now more fair again shall my city seem. Excuse me, I said Thingol, I meant Torgon. Also, J.R.R, thank you for the follow. Much appreciated. And now more fair shall my city seem than in the days when I deemed her lost, and Maeglin shall have the highest honor in my realm. Then Maeglin bowed low and took Torgon for lord and king, to do as he will. But therefore he stood silent and watchful, for the bliss and splendor of Gondolin surpassed all that he had imagined from the tales of his mother, and he was amazed by the strength of the city and the host of its people, and the many things strange and beautiful that he beheld. Yet to none were his eyes more often drawn than Idril, the king's daughter, who sat beside him, for she was golden as the Vanyar, her mother's kindred, and she seemed to him as the sun, from which all the king's halls drew its light. But Eol, following after Arethel, found the dry river and the secret path, and so creeping in by stealth he came to the guard, and was taken and questioned. And when the guard heard what he claimed, that he claimed Arethel as his wife, they were amazed, and sent a swift messenger to the city, and he came to the king's hall. "Lord," he said, "the guard have taken captive—" Oh, excuse me, this is a guard. "Lord," he said, "the guard have taken captive one that came by stealth to the dark gate. Eol, he names himself, and he is a tall elf, dark and grim, of the kindred of the Sindar. Yet he claims that the lady Arethel is his wife, and demands to be brought before you. His wrath is great, and he is hard to restrain, but we have not slain him, as your law commands." Then Arethel said, "Alas, Eol has followed us, even as I feared. But with great stealth was it done, for we saw and heard no pursuit as we entered the hidden way." Then she said to the messenger, "He speaks but the truth. He is Eol, and I am his wife, and he is the father of my son. Slay him not, but lead him hither to the king's judgment, if the king so wills." And so it was done, and Eol was brought to Torgon's halls and stood before his high seat, proud and sullen. Though he was amazed no less than his son at all that he saw, his heart was filled more with anger and with hate of the Noldor. But Torgon treated him with honor, and rose up and would take his hand, and said, "Welcome, kinsman, for so I hold you. Here you shall dwell at your pleasure, save only that you must here abide, and depart not from my kingdom. For it is my law that none who finds the way hither shall depart." But Eol withdrew his hand. "I acknowledge not your laws," he said. "No right have you or any of your kin to this land to seize realms or to set bounds, either here or there. This is the land of the Teleri, to which you bring war and all unquiet, dealing ever proudly and unjustly. I care nothing of your secrets, and I came not to spy upon you, but to claim my own, my wife and my son. Yet if in Arethel your sister you have some claim, then let her remain. Let the bird go back to the cage." Yeah, I know. "Where soon she will sicken again as she sickened before. But not so, Maeglin. My son you shall not withhold from me. Come, Maeglin, son of Eol. Your father commands you. Leave the house of his enemies and the slayer of his kin, or be accursed." But Maeglin answered nothing. Then Torgon sat in his high seat, holding his staff of doom. It literally says staff of doom, by the way. And in a stern voice spoke, "I will not debate with you, dark elf. By the sword of the Noldor alone are your sunless woods defended. Your freedom to wander where wild you owe to my kin." I want to draw a comparison here, but in a minute. "Your freedom to wander there wild you owe to my kin, but for them, long since you would have labored in thraldom in the pits of Angband. And here I am king, whether you will it or not. My doom is law." I'm going to pause there for a brief second. I want to reread that part to draw a comparison, and I want to see if you see it as well. Also, special thank you to Arthur King Live. Thank you for the follow. I'll reread this part. By the swords of the Noldor alone are your sunless woods defended. If you've read The Lord of the Rings, or you've seen the movies, there is a line that Boromir says in the Council of Elrond that says, by the blood of our people are your lands kept safe. There's a cool comparison there between Turgon and Gondolin keeping the woods safe and Boromir and Gondor, because Gondor is literally keeping Mordor at bay. Meanwhile, Turgon and the elves, really Doriath and Gondolin, they are keeping the woods safe. There's a cool comparison there. I can't help but think that maybe Peter Jackson drew some comparison. I don't know. So, I just really like that part. When I read that line, I'm like, either Peter Jackson did his homework or Tolkien in setting this up was masterful, or both. Definitely could be both. Let's go back to what Turgon is saying. This choice only is given to you, to abide here or to die here, and so also for your son. Then Eol looked into the eyes of King Turgon, and he was not daunted. But let me try that again. That was a weird phrasing I did there. Then Eol looked into the eyes of King Turgon, and he was not daunted, but stood long without word or movement, while a still silence fell upon the hall. And Arathel was afraid. Sorry, that's my dog and her bark collar. I may want to pause here. River, be good. You two people feel free to skip a couple seconds ahead. She's just looking at the door like... Oh, thank you for spamming my dog emote. So glad I made that one. Then Eol looked into King Thingol... Oh, okay, I read that. Okay, let me try this paragraph again, because it's important. Then Eol looked into the eyes of King Turgon, and he was not daunted, but stood long without word or movement, while a still silence fell upon the hall. And Arathel was afraid, knowing that he was perilous. Suddenly, swift as a serpent, he seized a javelin that he had held beneath his cloak, and cast it at Maeglin, crying, "The second choice I take, and for my son also, you shall not hold what is mine." But Arathel sprang before the dart, and it smote her in the shoulder, and Eol was overborne by many, and set in bonds and led away, while others tended Arathel. But Maeglin, looking upon his father, was silent. It was appointed that Eol should be brought on the next day to the king's judgment, and Arathel and Idril moved Turgon to mercy. But in the evening, Arathel sickened, though the wound had seemed little, and she fell into darkness, and in the night she died, for the point of the javelin, though none knew, was poisoned. Therefore, when Eol was brought before Turgon, he found no mercy. And they led him forth to the Caragdur, the precipice of black rock upon the north side of the hill of Gondolin, there to cast him down from the sheer walls of the city. And Maeglin stood by and said nothing. But at the last Eol cried, "So you forsake your father and his kin, ill-gotten son. Here shall you fail of all your hopes, and here may you yet die the same death as I." Then they cast Eol over the Caragdur, and so he ended, and to all in Gondolin it seemed just. But Idril was troubled, and from that day she mistrusted her kinsman. But Maeglin prospered and grew great among the Gondolindrim. Gondolindrim are the people of Gondor. Praised by all, and high in the favor of Turgon, For if he would learn eagerly and swiftly all that he might, he had much also to teach. And he gathered about him and he gathered about him all such as had the most bent to smithcraft and mining. And he sought in Echoriath, which is the encircling mountains, and found rich lodes of ore, of diverse metals. Most he prized the hard iron of the mines of Angband in the north of the Echoriac, and thence he got a wealth of forged metal and steel, so that the arms of the Gondolindrim were made even stronger and more keen, and that stood them in good stead in the days to come. Wise in counsel was Maeglin, and wary, and yet hardy and valiant at need. And that was seen in after days, for when in the dread years of the Nirnaeth Aranoidiad, I'll explain what that is in a second, Torgon opened his leaguer and marched forth to the help of Fingon in the north. Maeglin would not remain in Gondolin as regent of king, but went to war and fought beside Torgon, and proved fell and fearless in battle. I'm going to pause there for a quick second. I mentioned something that sounds really weird. This is again, foreshadowing, not Tolkien's strong suit. He is literally spoiling what happens later on. And it was seen in after days, for when in the dread years of the Nirnaeth Arnoidiad, Torgon opened his leaguer and marched forth to help Fingon in the north. So, Gondolin, this hidden city, during a time called the Nirnaeth Arnoidiad, comes forward, reveals sort of that they're here, that these are where all these elves are. I'm not going to tell you what the Nirnaeth Arnoidiad is. Well, actually, am I? I wasn't going to, but maybe I should. Okay. Mute me for the last few seconds. I'll give you a wave. If you don't want to know what the Nirnaeth Arnoidiad is, mute me. I will give you a wave, and then you can come back, and you don't need to know. Nirnaeth. Okay, starting now. Nirnaeth Arnoidiad translates to the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. I'm done. That's all I'll say. You can come back, unmute yourself. Here we go. Let's wrap this up. Thus all seemed well with the fortunes of Maeglin, who had risen to be a mighty among the princes of the Noldor, and the greatest, save in the most renown of their realms. Yet he did not reveal his heart, and though not all things went as would he endured it in silence, hiding his mind so that few could read it, unless it were Idril Celebrimbor. For from his first days in Gondolin he had borne a grief, ever worsening, that robbed him of all joy. He loved the beauty of Idril, and desired her, without hope. The Eldar wedded not with kin so near, nor ever before had any desired to do so. And however that might be, Idril loved Maeglin not at all, and knowing his thought of her, she loved him the less, for it seemed to her a thing strange and crooked to him, as indeed the Eldar ever since have deemed it, an evil fruit of the kinslaying, whereby the shadow of the curse of Mandos fell upon the last hope of the Noldor. But as the years passed, still Maeglin watched Idril and waited, and his love turned to darkness in his heart, and he sought more to have his will in other matters, shirking no toil or burden, if he might thereby have power. Thus it was, in Gondolin, and amid all the bliss of that realm, while its glory lasted, a dark seed of evil was sown. I'm going to pause there and stop for this week. That being said, we have only been here an hour, so I will take any questions. We only got about 40 minutes of reading done, that part, but again, the chapters are just about 40-ish minutes. Also, a special thank you to Salty Sloan for that sub. I don't know why that didn't pop up on my... there we go. I can replay it. Thank you, Salty Sloan. Much appreciated. So, that is chapter 16 of Maeglin. Now, usually Tolkien doesn't dedicate a full chapter to specific characters, unless they're important later on, set things up. Oh, all right. Y'all, this has been, once again, a lot of fun. I love that I accidentally set up a book club. We are just approaching the halfway point. And also, I do want to get a sense from all of you, because we are coming up on a chapter that we're getting to the point where these chapters go just about 40 minutes, which seems a little low for me. However, I do the recap, I take questions, but there's less explaining for me to do now as I go. I'm also coming up to the chapter of Beren and Luthien, which is roughly 20-ish pages, about double what we normally do. And I know all of you here, there's only about 24 of you here, but let me know in the chat, and on YouTube as well if you're still watching. Would y'all be okay with a longer stream, an hour and a half long one, potentially a 2 hour to 2.5 hour one? That seems long to me, and I know not everybody is up for all of that long of a time, but it is something that, people have expressed an interest in, and with the Beren and Luthien chapter quickly approaching in, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks, there is going to be a desire for me to sort of read all of it. All right, chat on TikTok, or excuse me, chat on Twitch, definitely saying yes. Cool. So while all of you are here, a 4-hour stream. Oh gosh, listen, if I had that kind of time, I would. Unfortunately, I do not. I did want to get a couple of things out of the way at first. I didn't make a video about it, and I'm going to post on it afterwards if they are here. Also, YouTube. Actually, why don't I stop here before we begin? Or before we end. YouTube, thank y'all for coming so much. Feel free to check out the streams every Sunday at noon, and I will see you all next time.